But yeah, man, this is not the live part, but the reason I reached out was like, man, we were just talking about engaging in conversation as we go. Oh, maybe I will, just as if this is live. We'll just chat.
Yeah, do it, whatever.
Sweet.
You start then.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, man. So, I mean, we were having some conversations earlier around engaging in the conversation as it's happening, with what people are thinking, what they're feeling, what they're wrestling with, and doing that journey on the way, instead of trying to do that in isolation. And you posted around, it would be a shame for us to go through this whole process and not be changed as a church or as churches. So we should have a look at our thinking, have a look at our theology, have a look at those sorts of things. And you invited people to ask questions, but I just wanted to get in touch to go, hey, where's that coming from? And also get your thoughts on, I don't know, what you're thinking about in the season, or what's important to be engaging with, really.
Yeah, I think those are awesome questions. I'm not even really sure where to start with it all, but what I do know is that most of us have like confirmation bias. So probably whatever we already believed the church should or shouldn't be doing, or should be doing more of that it's not doing, and shouldn't be doing that it is doing, we probably look at these circumstances as confirmations of those things. And so, you know, there's definitely the people that are like, well, the church shouldn't spend money on this, and this is just another confirmation because the church is not those things, and, you know, lights and smoke machines or whatever the things people attach those ideas to. Other people like, yeah, the church should have always been in homes more anyway, and like, see, this is just, and I just think we have to be real careful where we just like, we analyze a situation and go, see, the methods I already thought were right, this is only showing that they're more right. Because right. I think the church, we love our methods, and methods are important. I mean, like, any way of thinking needs like skin and bones and something you can touch and see and engage with. But like, if we don't actually challenge the way we think about church, the way we think about God, the way we think about what Christian community means, the way we think about the purpose of life, if we don't actually challenge the thinking behind those things, we'll just swap out the methods, bring the same flawed or cracked thinking, and end up with the same flawed results, really. I don't know if that's maybe a bit depressing. I'm obviously not saying it as a judgment. I'm just saying it as like, before we can have the conversation about what the church of the future should look like, we have to go like, what is church?
100%, you know, yeah.
Who is God?
You feel like the temptation at the moment is to look for what is the method we need to use right now, instead of asking the bigger questions of our theology, our ecclesiology, you know, how we see the church and how we see God and those sorts of things, and to engage in those questions and to do that before we jump to what should we be doing now.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, I just think I don't know, I follow lots of different people and see some really wise stuff being spoken about and some really foolish stuff. I saw someone today saying, see, we don't need to be talking about church, just Jesus. And you're like, well, the problem is the Bible talks about church. So
Jesus talks about the church.
Yeah, so he's coming back for the church, you know. So I guess I understand the sentiment, and I've seen other people sort of post about, see, this is why, you know, and these are pastors, right? This is why church shouldn't have buildings, and this is why church shouldn't, you know, the show of church needed to stop, and God's allowed it to stop. And he's like, well, that's just really bad, like, theology, because God's allowed like online porn to continue, and that doesn't mean he's for it. And so, like, you know, it's just like we don't want to like use the circumstances to confirm our thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's some stuff, whether people have asked questions of what you posted up, or at the moment, what's some thinking that you're thinking about, or that you're wrestling with, or needs to be challenged, you think, instead of just projecting what you think already? What are you engaging?
I guess obviously we all do that to a certain degree, and certainly I do. I think the first thing is that I look at any circumstance as an opportunity for the church to come out healthier, stronger, deeper, wider, you know, whatever adjectives or whatever you want to put with it, but like that the church would come out more as God intended through any season or any circumstance. And I think however we look at the season like that, I'm looking at it like that, like we've got to go forward in the season, even though forward might not look like what we thought forward looked like 6 months ago. We still have to go forward. We have to be maturing. We have to be reaching. We have to be deepening, all of that sort of stuff. So I think that's the big idea. I think the last thing we want to do as the church is end up in like the Netflix Blockbuster sort of, situation where Blockbuster couldn't see that the world was changing, and they, I'm sure everyone's heard the story. They turned down Netflix for $50 million, which is like 1/2,600th of its current value.
Yeah.
So because they couldn't see, and I think we have an opportunity to step back and have a good look.
So is there any current paradigm that you're thinking with regards to that? I mean, an obvious one is church in person versus church online, but and missing what is possible in the season by doing what we've always done, or just importing some different methods. What some questions that you're wrestling with or asking?
Oh, I've got so many. I don't even know where to begin. Like, I'm already dissatisfied with church online. Because that's the sort of person I am. Like, I look for the cracks in things, look for how things could be better. And like, so what am I loving about church online? I'm loving how it's stretching me, how it's challenging me as a communicator. I'm loving that it's never been easier for people to be evangelists, and all it takes is sharing a link. I'm loving that it's never been easier for people to hear the message of Jesus and engage with conversations of God and things that of faith and things that matter. Like, it's a low risk buy-in for people to watch or to ask questions. I love that there's people watching and engaging that other wouldn't walk into church normally. I love all of that. What I don't love is that I don't love the way everybody's plastering their numbers about how many people they reached this weekend, and generally embellishing what it really means to reach somebody. If somebody attended a service for 2 minutes, we probably wouldn't say they attended, but if they watched us for 2 minutes, we celebrate them as if we reached them. I don't love that. In the same way, if all people do is attend a Sunday service at a church, their life's not really going to be that different in 3 years' time. So how much more so for consuming a Sunday service online? So I think while there's heaps to celebrate, there's heaps of thinking that we need to go, this is great first step, but what else? What else is going to sit behind all of this?
Yeah. Around, I mean, would a way, there's multiple ways, but a way you'd frame that would also be discipleship. What is the potential with that? And that's one of many things to think about. But how would you frame it? If you're not saying Sunday attendance, and a lot of people asking that question now, going, hey, Sundays, and you can't do that in the same way. What else are you looking at? Would discipleship be one way, or what else?
Yeah, discipleship's like a super tough term. Like, I think it's a term that people use heaps of the time. People use it to judge bigger churches generally, be like, but we're all about discipleship. But well, what is discipleship? Discipleship, somebody learning the trade of somebody else, really. That's what it is. And whose responsibility is that? Well, it's certainly not the teachers. It's the students. Like, it's not the builder's job to teach. Like, it is their job to teach the apprentice, but they're limited to the degree of which the apprentice wants to turn up and learn and ask questions and receive feedback and work hard. And I think the great challenge of church discipleship is we have like a classroom mentality about it. It's like, we were like, yeah, teach me more deeper truths. Whereas I think discipleship for Jesus was very much like, come on a journey with me. Come and sleep where I sleep, make the sacrifices I make, work hard when I work hard. It's really like, come and do what I'm doing. And in that process, you will grow and learn. And there'll be some teaching moments on the way. And we've got the teaching moments recorded for us in the Gospels. We don't have the in-betweens recorded for us, but that's what allowed for the teaching moments. And so I think the challenge of discipleship at the church is probably in the hands of the ones that want to be discipled.
Right. Yeah.
More in the ones that are there to do the discipling. I think there's more people available to do the discipling than there are people that are willing to actually put their life in the hands of somebody else to be discipled.
Yeah, I've heard it explained as well that the whole term of being discipled is a bit of a misnomer. Like the disciples were invited to follow Jesus at their inconvenience and his leisure, and not leisure as in it's easy, but it's on you. The invitation is there, and to say, I'm looking for someone, and I get it, I'm looking for someone to mentor or disciple me, versus I am wholeheartedly giving my all to be a disciple. Will go then, doing that. So,
and that's the challenge of all of this season, right? As we have our cultural, our worldview sort of lenses that we're not even really that aware of, because it's just the air we breathe. Like we know that we're conditioned towards individualism and selfishness. So surely that's a lens we look at discipleship through, which we look at, how's it going to work for me?
Right.
And that obviously that twists or skews perhaps our understanding of what the Bible's trying to talk about. Those aren't new challenges to us. Those are the challenges people have always had. Even the disciples had the challenge of looking through their cultural lens at Jesus, trying to understand who he was and who they thought he should be to them. But I've been thinking about a lot of things. Like, I think one of the big ideas I've been thinking about is how do we position ourselves towards God, and I think if we don't get that right, it might seem like we're going back too many steps, but I just think if we don't get this right, we'll never get church right. I think the challenge of secularism is we see the world as an environment to serve our ends and our means, and that's sort of like we're like everything's disposable to our own advancement, and if we can understand everything through our own ration and logic. And what that does is it subtly twists our perspective to see God as somebody to serve us, as opposed to us as somebody to serve God. That we really subtly, I know no Christian would say it, yeah, God's here to serve me, but actually our prayers and our posture actually do reflect, and our theology does reflect that, because anytime God stops serving our agenda, we have a crisis of faith, which really shows that our faith was not in a God who was mysterious and all-knowing and it was all about him. Our faith was in a God that we'd made in the image of our desires. And now that that's been cracked, we're having a crisis. And so I think that's like a big, I love that scene out of Remember the Titans, and the coach comes up to one of the white kids and he's like, who's your daddy? And he's trying to establish like the authority of the team, and I think it's a little bit like that. Like, we need to return to that. Yes, God loves us. Yes, he's for us. Yes, he loves to bless us. Yes, he wants good things for us. Of course he does, but he's still God and we're here to serve him, not the other way around.
Yeah. So when you say secularism, kind of, this is shattering a bit of, or like a good chance for people to have a look at that, you're saying like the worldview that people have is still often fundamentally about themselves. Or what do you mean by secularism? As, like secularism with a bit of Christianity thrown in, as opposed to God shaping and informing a whole worldview. You're saying like it's a chance to be aware of that and to allow that to be challenged and for God to reshape it.
Yeah, and I don't even know if the terms are right. I'm definitely not an expert in them, I guess. But I think quite often the challenge is do we see God through the lens of our worldview, or do we let God shape our worldview? And I think for many of us, it's very easy to see God through our worldview rather than to try our best to strip those away and allow God to shape our worldview. And I think one of the big traps of our time is that our worldview is very self-centric, and therefore our God he's, for many people, what we call our God is really is they love him and all of that sort of stuff, but I think the crises that we have, or the crises that we have, just reveal that perhaps sometimes he's more of an idol than the true God to us.
So how would you say right now is revealing a bit of that? Would you say the fact that there's a routine or like a way of doing Christianity that's been disrupted, so you go, oh, it's not so convenient, it's revealing the fact that it's not as convenient, and that's what would built it around? Or how do you think it's kind of a crisis for that?
I'm not quite sure. I just know that if we don't posture ourselves properly towards God, then any solutions we come up for what church should look like in the future is flawed, because church if yes, God loves us and he wants to do good things for us, but ultimately we're here to serve him, not he's here to serve us. If we don't get that right, we end up projecting the same flawed principles onto God, onto his church. And therefore we see church there to serve us. And when it stops serving us, we have a crisis of church, or we have a crisis of our journey with church, or of that particular group of people that we identified as the church to which we found belonging. And so I just think it's like, if we get it right with God, we're much more likely to get it right with his church, because his idea, it's for him. He has a purpose for it. He's coming back for her, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have any thoughts right now around, and it's obviously a journey that we're all engaging in, like on a healthy posture towards God? Or like you're saying, if we don't get the posture towards God and allow that to be shaped by God in this season rather than our methods and with church, then, I mean, do you have any thoughts around that? Personally, around the word and around prayer and around those sort of things, we're also seeking God as a church in that way. I mean, is there anything that you're saying this sort of posture is, not nailing it again, but...
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, other than just like our lives are here to bring him glory, and we can bring him glory through the way we suffer. We can bring him glory through our character. We can bring him glory in our lack, and we can bring him glory in our provision. But ultimately, it's all here. However we respond to whatever season, it's got to be about bringing him glory. In the way we respond and carry ourselves through those times, and the disciplines that we keep. He's got to stay the center of the picture. And when that happens, when we realize that ultimately, while it might sound like a big pressure or load, what it actually does is take the pressure off because it frees us from trying to get God to serve us, which causes anxiety to die down. It causes a restfulness to come, because all of a sudden we can stop trying to control God and let him be in control. I've got lots of thoughts. Like, I think I've got a whole sheet of paper in front of me of thoughts as I've been preparing different sessions around these. But,
Right.
I think some of the other mindsets, other than God being God, is that we need to rediscover that maturity is a team sport. Like, that you cannot become mature in your faith on your own. Right. That's what Ephesians 4 tells us, that God gave the church these gifts, and when these gifts are for the raising up of others, and when everybody is active in their gift, this work will continue until the whole body comes into a maturity in the knowledge and love of Jesus Christ. And so I think in our individual society, we have this idea that I can arrive on my own. And we don't realize that you cannot mature on your own. I think it's sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. It's sort of like the opposite of 1 Corinthians 12 talks about the body and all the parts are important. The issue in his day and age was that God saw that the people saw each other as unequal. And therefore, what he was trying to say is, just because you've got different roles doesn't mean you have different value.
Yeah.
In our day and age, we see everybody as equal, and therefore we don't value that there are different roles. So we come at the same metaphor from the opposite problem that the Corinthian church came at it from, because we don't struggle with equality. We now struggle with valuing the fact that we can be equal, but it doesn't mean we have the same role and the same thing to bring. And that's where I think, like, maturity is a team sport. Like, we need leadership. I think that's almost another thing, that unless we redeem a value for Christian leadership in this time, we will have another flawed principle of church. Because God,
when you say redeem it, you obviously feel like it needs a healthy perspective. Like, maybe there's an unhealthy perspective on Christian leadership at the moment, or could be.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a time gone before, long before me, where Christian leadership was incredibly abused, and perhaps in certain circles it still is abused to this day. I'm not a part of those circles, so I'm a little bit oblivious to it, but I hear allusions to it. Where it's sort of like this idea of people being in authority, they've abused that authority for their own gain or whatever it is, the manipulation of others. But And I think a little bit we can throw out the baby with the bathwater because we're afraid of that sort of stuff. But the Bible's super clear in so many different places to like that there is authoritative structures within the church, that God appoints different leaders, that different roles, while they're all important and they're all equal in value, they're not all equal in authority. These are sort of like dirty words in our culture, right? Where we're all the same and I don't really need anybody and you don't really know anything more than me. But the Bible, if we're going to reclaim church from the Bible, it's like the Bible talks about, obey your elders and your spiritual authority. It talks about respect your leaders, make it a blessing for them to lead you. It talks about, like don't make it hard on them. It talks about these different things, and so I think it's a big challenge because there's people go, yeah, it's all about home groups or it's all about whatever, and you're like, yeah, but we're still going to be like, it's still about appointed leadership. It's still about recognizing who is God on, who am I willing to follow as they follow Jesus. I think that I've been thinking about this before COVID-19. It's hard enough for people to make a church their home, like to commit to a church. It's a whole nother thing for people to let a leader be their pastor. And we as pastors only really know when we're truly somebody's pastor, when we tell them no and they stick around. And like no is the ultimate test of leadership, because it's easy to say you're my leader when we agree on everything.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's good, man. Yeah, I'm just got the wheels.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I guess it is that same thing around healthy view of leadership and not just leadership, but relationship and how that works together well for the glory of God. And not just saying, hey, I'm keen to be part of a church as long as it suits me, but the moment it doesn't, or if there's something that doesn't suit, then I choose no. Been thinking personally around like if church is our primary place of commitment and then our relationship with Christ, we're always going to have a massive problem, because that the hang-ups or different things that happen with both us trying to do our best in our humanity in different parts, and then you come to Christ afterwards, is like, well, if I don't get on well with what's happening in church or leadership, then I'm out with my faith as well. Instead of going, my faith is the foundation, and then because of that, I'm submitted to one another in love. It's like, well, that's near unbreakable, or like, it's a totally different way of approaching that, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've heard it said like this, and I probably need to do more theological work to know if it's got enough. Okay. If it's got enough substance, but if Jesus is effectively the bridegroom and the church is the bride, then what we essentially have is a father and a mother in some sense of our development. And obviously our faith is not in the church. That's not what church is. Our faith is in Jesus. And my faith is in Jesus. And sorry, my kids are just screaming out. My faith is in Jesus, and that's really the main point. But it doesn't mean as my faith comes into Jesus, I become a part of this thing that God calls the church, which at one level is this like mystical collection of all of the believers in the world. But at another level, anytime believers share a geographical location, they're actually supposed to share a kind of life together that builds each other up in that faith. And I think we like things to be in neat little boxes, and when it comes to our faith in Jesus and the church and all of that sort of stuff, it's just not neat little boxes. It's this mystery intertwining of things.
So is there anything like theologically that you're looking at the moment, both personally or with church, that's getting a bit of a shake up, or you're having some attention, putting some spotlight on?
Oh, so look, I think so many of these things. I think some of the, unless we peel back the layers of our secularism, of our individualism, of our entertainment sort of focused ism, if that was even an ism, of our lack of trust in authorityism. I'm just going to add isms because they make them sound more like, things. But unless we actually start to peel back the layers and realize maybe I've been reading the Bible as seeing God through these lenses, and maybe these lenses aren't very helpful. And maybe I need, while I can't escape and unravel these things overnight because I've been breathing them in for me for 34 years, I can be aware of them and realize when I read the scriptures, oh, that's challenging that worldview. I can't look at it through that worldview. That's actually confronting that worldview. And I don't know all of what that means, but I do know that I need to be able to read the scriptures with those things in mind. I think we need to ask the questions like, is the way the early church were the methods they had because they were the best methods, or were they expressions of the resources they had available to them at that time? Like, unless you actually answer that question, you'll be continually trying to return to this idea of a pure thing in the New Testament that it wasn't actually that pure. It had problems that would be plastered through the newspapers today if they were the churches of our day. And so, their methods were probably more a reflection of what they had available to them than an actual thought out methodology. And so I don't think we want to use those. I think just some of those things are like sort of guides that we need to look at to go, oh, okay. I still think Acts 2, verse 42 to 47 is our greatest guide to what the church could be and should be. I think it's not just a description. I think it's a prescription. I don't think it's talking about methodology. It's talking about devotions. It tells us in that passage there's 4 things that the early church were devoted to. And then it tells us because they were devoted to these things, here's what their common life looked like. It says they were devoted to the apostles' teaching. That thankfully for us is recorded in the New Testament for us. That's who wrote most of it, the apostles. And so, in that line, it's not just saying they were devoted to the teaching, they were devoted to who the teaching was coming from. And so, like, there's a twofold devotion to that. There was a recognized God-ordained leadership for them. And then from that place, then they could trust the doctrine. It says that they were devoted to fellowship. Fellowship's really like, our best word for that would be like commonness, oneness of life. So they were literally devoted to doing life together, not doing life apart, not visiting each other once a week, but actually having their lives intertwined. That's what they were devoted to. Doesn't mean you have to join a commune. It's a spirit. It's how you see church. Do you see church as this new world you've entered, or do you see it as a place to attend? It says that they were devoted to the sharing in meals, and particularly the Lord's Supper. I think we misunderstand that. It's not having dinner together. That's not what the scripture's saying. It's actually what they're saying is that after they worshiped together in that day and age, they would return back to homes to have meals. The powerful thing that was happening in the church is that people were crossing cultural boundaries and social boundaries for those meals. Traditionally, rich people ate together, free people ate together, slave people ate together. But in these meals, all people were eating together. And that caused all sorts of issues, but there was a beauty of equality in a non-equal world, crossing socioeconomic boundaries. And then they were devoted to prayer. And it says, and the Lord's Supper in that. And I think what that's saying is the point of everything that they were doing was Jesus. It wasn't any of those things in themselves. Like when they say sharing in meals, they're saying it was Jesus who was bringing the commonness and the oneness and the equality to things. So, and then it tells us because they were devoted to those 4 things that there was awe and wonder and miracles and radical generosity and sacrifice and joy. It tells us that they met together in large worship gatherings and in small, intimate meals. It tells us that they gained favor with the world around them. And it tells us that the Lord was adding to them every single day because of that. So I think that's like, from a theology perspective, it's not saying methods. It's saying get devoted to these things and everything else will take care of itself. They're really the original church values.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I need to be reminded that they didn't have the New Testament. You know, they didn't have a book of Acts to copy. They weren't looking for a methodology. They didn't have an Acts 2:42 to refer to. They were just living it. And we can
Yeah.
take it and even copy it as a model. Been listening to a podcast that talks about, have you heard of This Cultural Moment? That podcast.
Oh, I have heard of it actually. I've never listened to it. I don't really listen to things. I'm a bit naughty that way.
All right. Well, verbally, I'll tell you then.
Yeah.
But they talk about this thing around having people wanting the kingdom without the king, that they want the things that Jesus taught or the worldview that Jesus described, but they just want no king. And so you get this misnomer, or you get this same sort of thing. You could copy the Acts 2:42 as a means for trying to create great community and do it without Christ at the center and totally miss the point.
Yeah.
You know, or you could copy all the devotions as trying to build a good church. And like you're saying, is they weren't setting out to build a good church. They were living devoted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the challenge of our time, and whether you look at it through a secularism lens, which naturally leads to look at it through a socialism lens, which effectively says we can rid the world of evil and make everything good ourselves. That's really like it assumes, those two perspectives assume at the heart of people is good, that people are essentially good. And if we actually just allowed them to be good, and it's the system that's corrupt, but people are good. So if we change the system, everything will be fixed. The problem is that's just not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that people are not good, that in fact we're infallibly flawed and in need of redemption. And if left to our own devices, evil only grows in us, not goodness. And so,
yeah. So the question for you, like, if someone, and it's super challenging in our day and age to kind of go, I'm not fundamentally good, I'm fundamentally flawed. But if you don't accept that as like a starting place, what do you think? Like, what's the outcome?
well, then you don't think that you need God ultimately. God's an icing on at best, God becomes the icing on the cake to your life. At worst, he becomes irrelevant. And so if you think you're fundamentally good, but the issue in the world is that the system's corrupt, rich people hold their money from you, people don't share enough, you know, there's these conspiracies and that conspiracies, and if we could just fix it all, then everything in the world would be good and there'd be no more suffering anymore. I mean, it's just a flawed concept. It doesn't work. And in fact, history shows that when people assume that people are good and going to do the right things, more people only end up getting hurt. I'm not saying there's not good in people, there absolutely is, but there's unfathomable like evil as well.
Yeah, I saw a quote from something like 50 years ago. A Christian scholar at the time was asked, what's wrong with the world? Expecting that he would write for this newspaper this big, here's what's wrong. And he just wrote back, I am.
Yeah.
Yours sincerely, and whoever the guy was, can't remember. But this notion, like, I'm not going to point my finger and say, if we just changed all that, it would be great. But saying it's in here is pretty, it's massively confronting.
I mean, that's what our world tells us, even here in New Zealand, right? The underlying premise is that we don't need God, we don't need religion. These things only cause harm and only cause division. We don't need morality and moral principles. All we need is everybody to share better. And if everybody just shares a little bit better, the world will be a better place. We say that crime is just a result of poverty. Like everything's just an outcome of lack is effectively and if we could just fix the lack, everybody would be good. And of course, there's stats that support some of that way of thinking, as in, of course, when there's more poverty, there's more crime. But it's a flawed principle to think that lack is the cause of human suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been having some conversations recently around pride and just, the bigness of the gospel. We've just celebrated Easter and going, God, we want a greater revelation of what you did and how it matters. And if it feels like it doesn't hit, not just emotionally, but mentally and spiritually and otherwise. Like, obviously God's not the problem. So saying, God, what do you need to shift in us? And saying, like, God can't get bigger and there to be a real sense of wonder while you're still the biggest thing in your world. Like, if pride is filling your whole lens, and same with your sin, if your pride minimizes your sin to be so small, then why would you need, like, forgiveness is like, yeah, neither here nor there, but I would accept myself anyway. So, like, it takes the gospel down and just makes it this small, and my life is this big.
Yeah, well, pride is blind, right? Pride's the one vice that can't see itself, and it blocks us from being able to see all other vices in ourselves, because, like you say, like I've always thought about pride as a space issue. So it's how much of, that's why we say when people are like prideful or arrogant, we say they're full of themselves. Like, they're so full of their own ideas of who they are and how the world is, that there's no room for any other ideas. And so, of course, if we're so full of ourselves, there's certainly no room for God. And I think that's why the Bible constantly talks about the emptying of oneself, or the taking off a certain type of clothes and putting on another type of clothes. That's why Paul talks about, I've been crucified with Christ. Like, I literally took the person that was filling me up and I put him to death so I could be alive in Christ. So there would be space for someone else to be alive in me. And so the life I now live in this body, I live through faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. But
I'd love your thoughts on this, man. That whole, like, the death of self, we don't really understand a lot of that. When the Apostle Paul's saying, I've been crucified with Christ, he's not talking about his personality or how God's made him, but maybe more the sinful tendency, or, pride, or fundamentally those things. I think I've struggled with that, where it goes, well, God fundamentally wants to put me to death that he would live through me. And instead saying, well, he made us, so it's not like he doesn't like who we are. But there's
we love who we are, right? Like, if I could, like, I think we love who we are in some ways, and we hate who we are. We end up with both of those things. I'm saying more in that I think most of us are more aware of all of our faults than we are of the good things about ourselves. Obviously, that's the way we are. But I'm saying, in our greater sense of the world, we're infatuated with ourselves, the way we're made, the personality tests, the strengths, let me be me. I think it's a big issue, because I think while God did make some of those aspects, there's no doubt, and while there is uniqueness that needs to be celebrated and treasured, even those things need to be put to death. That I don't get to choose which parts of me to put to death and surrender to Christ. I have to surrender all of them, because otherwise I'm assuming I know which parts are already good. Like, God can't redeem or resurrect anything that isn't dead and hasn't been given over to him to do that. So I actually have to take my personality and not assume it's all good. I have to go, God, which parts of this need redeeming? Which parts of this operate out of brokenness? Which parts of these have cracked lenses? Which parts of these have insecurities? And I need to constantly just go, all that I am, God, I'm not married to any of it. I'm not attached to any of it. I want to just be married to you and you alone. So I'm going to keep giving my whole self over to you, and trust that you'll give me back, or you'll redeem back what is right to keep. Even we come with, that's maybe a little bit of a blurrier area to talk about, because it's hard and it's very visceral. But if we just take, like, desires and dreams, which might be very personal, we end up with this, like, God loves to give you the desires of your heart. That's a verse, right? It's like, yeah, it's beautiful. We love that one. But, like, we actually at the same time have to lay down all of those desires, because the heart's deceitful above all else. And so the scripture also says that. And so it's like we don't want to just take one scripture out and hold on to that. We want to take the big idea of the Bible out, which is God can be trusted. He's awesome. He's mysterious and mystical, but he's God, and he wouldn't be God if he wasn't those things. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are, like, who can fathom, just all the aspects of him. And so it's like, let him be God. And the big idea is trust that and give yourself over to him, because you can trust him in the process. The more you try to hold on to parts of your life, Bible's pretty clear, the more you'll lose them. but the more you lay it all down for his sake, it says, not just lay it down so you can become a better person, but lay it down for his sake, the more you'll save it. And I think there's something beautiful about that.
There's so much in that, man. That's amazing. And personally going, hey, if we start defending, you know, our personality type to God, or saying, well, you know, I did a personality test and it came out like this. So God, you would understand that in my unique situation, I don't ... or I will ...
I'm justified to get angry at this.
Yeah. I've done the Enneagram test and it came out as this. So, you know, it's just what's happening. Or like, God, you'd surely let me hold on to this part of my dreams and desires because that's so important to me. So I'll give you this part, but would you bless this part instead of... Oh, yeah, that's awesome, man.
I mean, we've got so many agendas, right? That's the challenge of being a human and following God fully, is we're full of agendas, and we keep if we're just left to our own devices, we'll keep creating God in the image of those agendas, and we're effectively no different than creating idols. We're just putting Jesus' name on all of the idols, and unless it's only really through pain and suffering and disruption and those sorts of things that those naive views of God can get torn down, so that we can get free finally, because it's super exhausting trying to get God to serve you all the time, but it's super freeing just letting him be God and going, like at the moment, I was supposed to be planning in Auckland. It's cost us so much money and so much disruption. I can be like, come on, God, I thought that was your plan. Or I can just be like, God, I'm disappointed. I'm going to be honest with you about that, because I know that you're compassionate and you love to minister to my heart. However, like, I don't have one bit of anxiety around it, because I'm like, he's still God. It makes no difference. Like, who knows what the future holds? It doesn't matter. Like, it wasn't about that or this, and obviously we hope it still goes forward and we're planning for that. What I'm just trying to say is that it's like, when God's God, disruptions are a whole lot less disruptive.
Yeah. Do you think around we avoid like a theology that allows for suffering? I know it's a huge topic, but even just you were just saying before, like allowing you know, tough times can do a work for us to rely on God. Not that that's the point of it. Obviously, the God doesn't cause it in that way, but when we try and avoid it and get God to serve us all the time, you know, where that just reveals our fundamental heart towards God.
Yeah, one of the best books I've ever read is Timothy Keller's book. It's Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, and I'd highly recommend it. It's like this beautiful, readable, theological understanding of a biblical worldview, a biblical like view of suffering and of God, and why there's suffering, and what God does in suffering. And so I think our modern worldview without God has zero tools to help humanity through suffering, because it doesn't give suffering meaning, it doesn't give suffering purpose, and that's why people are filled with anxiety, depression. It's why people end up in suicide. Obviously it's not like a judgment thing, it's just the reality is the statistics of our world show that our worldview is ill-equipped to help us process suffering, unlike any other worldview before, at least in other religions and other things that at least gave some tools and some meanings to these things. But if life is just the survival of the fittest, if this is all there is, if there's no such thing as good or evil, it's just a perspective, then there really is no such thing as suffering. It's just a perspective, because what is there to compare it to? And so if that's our sort of worldview, then it's like, when things happen that you don't want to have happen, it's like, that doesn't give you any tools to walk through it and come out a better person. And I think that's shown in our post-traumatic stress disorders. Those are new things. People used to have post-traumatic growth opportunities. You know, you're going through crisis used to make people stronger. Now it seems to make us weaker. And it's because we don't have a way to pull meaning from it. And I think that's what Christianity does, is we worship a God who suffers, who suffered, who promises to redeem all suffering and make all right things wrong. That's the story of like the resurrection, that it doesn't matter how bad things are, and even if you lose your life, that God promises to make it all right one day, as if no wrong thing had ever happened. That's the idea of no more tears, no more. And so I think when we become followers of Jesus, we have a God who knows what it's like to suffer. We have a God, it's interesting, Jesus suffered to identify with humanity, and he invites us to suffer to identify with him. It's just like this crazy, like it started off as his way of connecting with us and becoming more like us, and now it's our way of becoming more like him. And I think, yes, God is not the cause of suffering. I don't even think he allows suffering in that sense, no more than he allows you to drive down the road and be a part of a car crash. Like it's not like God allows some things and doesn't allow some things. It's that the world is broken. Brokenness begets more brokenness. Pain begets more pain. We're born into this corrupt system, if you would, and God is active in it and is working at redeeming it, and one day he will redeem it all. And in the meantime, though, his promises is that if you would walk with him through the things, not only could he be glorified in your suffering, but we could also grow in it, in the suffering, into more of a Christ-likeness. So suffering sucks, but it's the reality of life, and thankfully our faith gives us some tools to deal with the suckiness of it better than we would without those tools.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, not just as tools for us to create meaning out of nothing, but actually fundamentally that believing those things are truth. That we're holding on to, not let's build a toolkit out of Christianity that can help us with our own life that already puts God at the periphery.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally there is meaning in suffering. What do you think is I mean, we're talking about church things and change and disruption. What do you think, in light of what we've been talking around with secularism and allowing God to be foundational and shaping everything from worldview, and just with the way things are changing at the moment, what's the opportunity for people that maybe have been going to church or find themselves feeling pretty disrupted? What do you think is an opportunity for them to engage with God in a new way with those questions of maybe secularism or church as I knew it or how I liked it or whatever? Like what's the opportunity for people to engage with God in this season, you reckon?
I think more people than ever are gonna experience crisis if they haven't already. I think it's not like a prophecy or prediction, it's just a reality. Like people are gonna fall on financially hard times, career path difficult times, where they've only known a world where they can step forward. They're gonna experience a few steps back. It's gonna be a new thing for all of us, and it already is for many people. I think if that is causing a crisis of our faith, it's an indicator that our faith needs to be rebuilt, needs to be rediscovered, that perhaps our faith wasn't what it should be or what it could be or what it was intended to be from the outset. So it's not like an alarm bell, it's more of like a little nice warning sign to be like, oh, okay, if I'm feeling shaken by something like this, perhaps I need to go a bit deeper in all of these things and peel back some layers and discover God for who he really is. And so I think it's an invitation to read the right things, to talk with the right people, and to rebuild those things, not have a crisis of faith, but actually have a strengthening of faith. I think it's an opportunity for us to realize that church was always supposed to be how we follow Jesus together. Like, if you just want to simplify what is church, it's how we follow Jesus together. And with the entertainment of it, falling away for a time, and with with a lot of what we're used to propping it up, having stripped back, it helps us to rediscover, that's what church is. Now, we're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We still need to have godly leadership. We still need to have sacrificial giving. We still need to serve one another. Like, these are expressions of Christianity. We still need to be focused on reaching lost people. If we lose these pillars of the church, we will lose what it means to follow Jesus together, because this is what Jesus does. He does those things, and he calls us to those things, and he leaves those things for us as examples. So yeah, I think there's that. Like, if we could come out of it with God really being God in our lives, and if we could come out of it really committed to each other and helping each other journey towards eternity, and being a part of the work of God here on earth, then I think that's a great start. There's no doubt many other things, but those would be two pretty big pillars to put in place.
Oh, it's awesome. I'm just thinking about how to flip and re-edit this video with so much gold you've given. There's seriously, man, but like, recording aside, and that, like, just such great thoughts for church. Personally, you know, your that stuff on devotion at the start, going, hey, look, I think that really gives some language to what Tim and I were trying to discuss earlier today, which was like, if we get the devotion, if the gospel becomes central to everything we're doing, it's kind of like an SAS person that's been trained, and you can drop them in any situation. You don't have to prep them for every situation.
Yeah, I because I'm trying to do the small group series, and I've sort of got it down into, like, at the moment I'm trying to reduce it down to like six things. And so the first one is that big idea that I talked about at the start of, like, right positioning of God in our lives. The second one is those devotions. Like, that's a message in itself. I touched on maturity as a team sport. Ephesians 4 is a very important theological framework of the church, that we all need each other to be mature. The other side of that coin, though, which would be another session, is my growth is my responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's this weird dichotomy between, like, that's what 2 Peter 1, chapter 1 and 2, like, add to your faith, all of patience, and add to your patience this, and add to this, and, like, if you do these things, then you'll be a productive follower of Jesus and his kingdom. It's sort of like, so there's this weird thing, we need each other, but I've got to own it at the same time and dig my own well.
The kind of allowing God to make you more productive in that sense is not going, you're going to be more loved as a result. It's just like, you'll be more helpful to the kingdom.
Yeah.
You know, the love God. What's that?
Because it's about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I think rediscovering that leadership is God's idea, I think that has got to be one of the most lost things, particularly amongst millennials. We all want to be the leader of our own lives. I'm the boss of me, and we're missing out on so much of what God wants, because, like, the kingdom works through deposits. The kingdom is like a pass it on. It's a Chinese whisper system. Yes, we all have a direct connection to God. Once again, it's a dichotomy. Yes, we all receive from God the Spirit, yet at the same time, the laying on of hands. And the laying on of hands is about, something can move from one person to another. Even when Paul and Peter were arguing, right, about, like, they go, but we agreed that this is one of the pillars. It's the laying on of hands, if you like. There's more to that than just praying for the sick.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Apostle Paul saying, I long to be with you that I may impart. I don't know the scripture in full, but there's this kind of, if there's a scripture for us being together as well, not the only one, but there's something different when we're together than when we're apart, spiritually as well.
That's right. Totally. Otherwise we would say that Jesus came at really the wrong time, because he should have come now, when he could have reached everybody. But if it really wasn't about that, if it wasn't about broadcasting to everybody, but actually imparting to somebody, then So I think that rediscovering leadership is God's idea. I think the other big pillar that needs to be kept is mission, is why the church exists. Ultimately, the church is here for a reason, and it's not buying time until heaven. It's here to extend what God talks about in 2 Peter chapter 3. Like, God is patiently waiting that none would be lost, but all would be saved, and the church is here for that. And so, well, those are some. I've got heaps of other ideas, but it's like, I feel like those are some of the big pillars of if people don't get a right perspective on these things, whatever the model of church is in the future, it'll probably just be more broken than the one that was 2 months ago. Because if we already had problems with people only engaging at church because of a certain mindset at a certain level, those things are going to become worse in a digital world, not better. If we take the same mindset to a digital world, if people stuck around for a year or 2 or 3 years at best, if they weren't engaged at a deeper level than Sundays, what's the digital time frame on that? 3 months, maybe? You know?
Yeah, when something else is a double tap away or a click away or a distraction in your lounge room, while it's amazing we can reach people like that.
I mean, I stopped watching a Netflix series and feel zero guilt that I stopped watching.
Yeah, who's it? James K. Smith, he's written a book called We Are What We Love. And he takes the Augustine principle, or the description of, we think that we're rational thinking beings, where we say, I think, therefore I am, and fundamentally we're rational. So we set up classrooms and teaching sessions and Sundays, even to that extent, sometimes it's like, if we can just teach people the right stuff, it will change their hearts. And he says, actually, on a deeper level, we're being formed by the ways in which we live. And he says, you're more formed by your phone than your faith. You know, like your phone says you can have what you want, when you want, how you want it, at a tap away. And because of the amount of time you spend using it, you're more ingrained in that than the worldview of your faith. So God just gets inserted into that. I can have what I want, when I want, how I want it. And same thing, man.
And then when God makes us wait, we have a crisis.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like if the Bible says that we've been given an unshakable kingdom, like if what we've been given is something unshakable, every time we feel shaken, what we should realize is we haven't grabbed a hold of what God's given us. Because he didn't give us something that was shaky. And I think there's just little clues in our life, right, like that. Like when we're frustrated at God, while yes, there's something very human about being frustrated at God, the Psalms are there. The Psalms always finish with, but, Lord, I will, trust you.
Yeah.
Whereas our days don't always finish with that, or our prayers don't always finish with that.
And there's so much good stuff. Dude, those sessions that you have planned out or that you're thinking about for your life group series or small group series, they sound incredible.
Yeah, I've been trialing a few sessions with my staff, like in our staff meetings. Like I've done a few of them with them, and then just got a little bit of feedback, or just sometimes been an external process. So when you say some of it, you work it out. You're like, oh, that's not good, or I was missing a big piece of the puzzle, and the argument had existed in my mind, but not in the, So I think we're just looking at the season going, I don't want to preach about this stuff on Sundays. That's not when there's all these people tuning in on all different parts of their journey, it's not actually helpful to people on Sundays. But I do want to be able to have a conversation with the heart and soul of our church about who we are as a church and what it means for the future, and give them an opportunity for us to become better and deeper in it. And so figured filming with my iPhone for 10 to 12 minutes and leaving them with some discussion questions will probably achieve that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. We'll ask for a copy of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's great, man. Dude, I'll let you go.
Good to see you, bro.
Yeah, it's been awesome to chat, man. And you just mentioned verbal processor, definitely here as well. Loving the way that you're thinking about that stuff too, and wrestling those. Do you enjoy Nathan Finocchio's stuff?
Yeah. I like him because he's trustworthy. Like he's not a theological challenger that doesn't understand the centrality of the church. And I think sadly that's way too rare, that so many of the great theological minds have lost their love for the church, and therefore they can't lead people where they're not. And so that allows it very hard for you to encourage those voices in people's lives, because sadly there's just not enough of them that communicate in a way that people can like there's obviously lots of great theological minds that love the church, but not necessarily ones that use modern communication technologies. So all the modern ones are more church haters.
Yeah, right.
And the ones on podcasts and whatnot,
Yeah, he's got some interesting stuff. Well, it seems like he's not challenging from within, but just the way he's happy to question and to engage and to come to scripture and all those sorts of things. At the same time, happy to have a bit of a laugh.
Oh yeah, the humour is an important part of it, right?
It's good, eh?
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Dude, that's real. Yeah, it's just awesome, and it's cool to engage with like different pastors walking the journey at the same time. Going, what are you thinking about? What are you challenged by? What's going on?
I just think the reality is church isn't going to be that different in its forms and functions in 2 years' time, other than it will be way better at engaging people through technology. Like the reality is that for 2,000 years, people have gathered in big gatherings, small gatherings, served the poor, and prayed for each other. Like, it's not going to stop. Like, there's going to be way more of the new that looks exactly like the old. The challenge is can we have a lot of what looks the same, because it's looked the same for a long time, but with a different heart towards it and a different thinking towards it. That's what will make it new, more than just the methods and or the structures or the systems of it. It's actually having a new heart towards it.
So even with the questions that you're talking about, saying, hey, we need to look at our thinking and our theology and those sort of things, not just import methods, but also not saying, also the solution is not doing that different thinking and theological work and then coming up with new methods and systems. Like the goal is not new methods and systems reflective of theology, but that would actually get a new heart.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's what God's really interested in, right? I think we just overcomplicate. What will church look like? And well, if it's looked the same through however many, it's looked more or less the same through however many revolutions already. I don't know. I don't want to be a cynic, but I don't know. Maybe we're overstating it.
Yeah. With some people saying, nothing will be the same. Everything's changed. It's like, well, some fundamentals are still there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we say those things because they're dramatic and they sound inspiring, right? I just don't know if they're true. Like, imagine what people would have been saying about church before World War II and after World War II. Did it change that much? Not really. Did the church get a bit better at reaching people? Absolutely. Were people a bit more open to God? Absolutely. Did the world have a bit of a moral reset back to conservatism? Absolutely. But ultimately, did churches still do the same things? Yep.
Yeah. Oh, it's good, man.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. I might be proven wrong or right. We'll find out. Every week I feel like I've got a new perspective anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think it's encouraging, like having the conversation, in the conversation too, like you can get the sense from some people, keep your eye out because nothing will be the same. Like, and you're going, okay, well, if everything's going to change, well, I need to keep my eyes open for everything. And then there's also going, hey, let's just go back to the way we were. So.
Yeah. And we don't want that. Like that mentality is like, pardon the interruption, but your normal service will return shortly. It's like, that's not what we want. Even if all the forms are the same in the future, as long as we're different, that's the main point. If a few things look different, then cool, so be it. But that's certainly secondary from us being different.